The other day, I was walking with my wife Morena outside Sants train station here in Barcelona. We had just come back from a long weekend in Lleida, another town in Catalonia, and it was the middle of the afternoon. We were just walking with our backpacks. It was broad daylight. We walked a few blocks, stopped at a crosswalk, and then suddenly, chaos. Morena shouted something, I felt a tugging at my neck, and two guys on electric scooters sped off from behind me, looking back as they went. It took me a couple of seconds to piece together what had happened. A couple of low-life guys had tried to steal my gold necklace, and Morena had stopped them by grabbing it at the same time they did. The necklace was broken, and I had a big scrape mark around my neck, but otherwise I was fine, just annoyed. Morena and I both got gold necklaces for our Hindu wedding, necklaces which were, in fact, blessed by Lord Shiva at the ceremony. It's an Indian thing. So this is a bit of an update about petty crime in Barcelona. Because I guess the lesson here is not to wear your expensive things around town. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 110. 110. And it's a bit of a random thoughts episode. I've done this before. This is actually random thoughts number 16. Not that all of those other 15 are podcasts, I assume, but I have done plenty of random thoughts on here before. Today, we're talking about petty crime, about the big blackout from a couple of weeks ago, and about another anti-tourism protest. You can support this podcast over at expatmadrid.com/donate, expatmadrid.com/donate. You can donate anything from €3 on up to however much you feel comfortable with. I appreciate it. I will give you a shout out on the next episode of the podcast. And of course, you could use the opportunity to let me know what you think about the podcast. There's, a possibility of attaching a message to your donation, and you can let me know your opinion as well as request topics for a future episode. I can't do literally any topic because I have my limited knowledge of things, but I do some research about all kinds of topics here, and that's why we have such a wide variety of things as podcast episode topics. So, expatmadrid.com/donate. Thank you very much. Let's get back to petty crime in Barcelona. So, as I was saying, nothing really happened. I didn't go to the police because what are they going to actually do about an attempted mugging? I don't know, probably nothing. The thieves didn't get away with my necklace, and I wasn't actually hurt. I just had this sort of, scrape mark on my neck. Anyway, you occasionally hear of someone being roughed up here in Barcelona over a €250,000 watch or something similar. My interest in the problems of people who spend €250,000 on watches is sort of limited. Also, if I have to read about something in the news, I just assume it's not a very common problem. If it is a common problem, I'll hear about it from other people in my life. So when people would ask me if it's okay to wear expensive jewelry around Barcelona, I would say that, yeah, it's probably no problem. Now that this has happened to me, I am revising that, and I am saying that actually it might be a problem. Because here's the thing, I'm not exactly a soft target. I'm above average in size, and years of martial arts have trained me to be constantly looking over my shoulders. But still, I look very foreign, and about once a year someone tries to rob me. So far, fingers crossed, without success, but those electric scooters make it so people can get up behind you really quick, and all bets are off. Situational awareness is great, but situational awareness will only get you so far if your criminals are motivated and actually have a plan. In this case, if not for Morena's quick save, I would have lost the necklace. We are both leaving expensive-looking things at home for the foreseeable future. If you're walking around with your phone in your hand, I really have no reason to believe that somebody on a scooter couldn't just grab it and be gone before you knew what was happening. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of these people are high as balls on whatever it is they take, so they're not calculating risk in the normal way. Be careful out there. You're probably not going to get shot or stabbed, but petty crime of this type is pretty common. Anyway, this is just a heads up. I wrote more about pickpockets and other petty crime in a previous article. That is episode 64. Long story short, the courts are overwhelmed and the penalties are very low, so a lot of criminals work with a certain amount of impunity. So be careful out there. Next random thought of the day. The great blackout mystery continues. It's been 2 weeks since the power outage that left Spain and Portugal in the dark for around 12 hours. I mentioned the blackout, el apagón in Spanish, here on the podcast, but not on the blog. So here's a bit of an update as to where we are so far. Are you ready? The update is we basically have no information from the government about what really happened. The government is going to investigate. The European Union is also going to conduct an inquiry, and they will all let us know as soon as they can. With how fast news happens these days, the whole blackout issue has been pretty well forgotten in La Vanguardia and El País. Last week we had a brief border clash between India and Pakistan. An artist named Bad Bunny sold an incredible number of tickets for his upcoming concerts in Madrid and Barcelona. And finally, an American was elected Pope. All that has pushed the problems of the electrical grid off the front pages. There are a few comments about it down in the lower sections of the websites, but it's not top story anymore. Meanwhile, President/Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez spent the first 10 days after the blackout saying that it's definitely not renewable energy that's the problem, and that anyone pointing out that we never had these issues when we used more nuclear power is a right-wing conspiracy nut. He said this, in fact, with such frequency that I can only assume he's lying. The tech publication Wired has an article called What Caused the European Power Outage? That's the name of the article, What Caused the European Power Outage? That article explains a bit about how the electrical grid works and suggests that solar and wind are inherently a bit unstable and that connections with France are limited, so we can't just get topped up by their power plants if we need it. Apparently, there are people sitting in some room somewhere adjusting the amount of electrical production moment to moment all day long. I don't know. As we all discovered the other day, it's really easy to not think about how the electrical grid works as long as it's working, but as soon as it stops working, you tend to have these thoughts. In any case, Wired magazine is directly contradicting Pedro Sanchez's version of events, and I tend to think that Wired magazine could be right. So it may in fact be that renewable energy presents a few supply problems and that coal or nuclear are more stable power sources. Anyway, the whole blackout thing wasn't a huge problem in my life. Hopefully the people in charge of the grid will make adjustments and we can move forward. Some articles I've read suggest that having large batteries somewhere to stabilize the power supply would work even with solar and wind. And what do I know? I'm just some guy with a podcast. I am also well aware that there are a lot of countries out there where you can't count on just having electricity all day long. However, Spain probably does not want to join the ranks of those countries. We were recently named Best Economy in the World. That was something I talked about a few episodes ago. It was episode 99, actually. If you would like to hear about that, I think it would be a good idea for us to try to maintain our good economic standing and not be the kind of country that just has rolling blackouts all the time. Spain has not always been an economic powerhouse, but it would be nice to sort of ride this out and see where it takes us. Final random thought of the day. Another squirt gun protest. Speaking of things that were quickly forgotten in the news cycle, the morning of the big blackout, I woke up to the news that there had been another squirt gun protest against tourism. Yes, some brave anti-capitalist warriors had sprayed a tour bus with water while holding signs somewhere around the Sagrada Familia area. All this caused delays of approximately 10 minutes to a single tour bus, and the police identified about 20 protesters as being part of the action. In other words, until the power went out all over Spain, Portugal, and part of France, I thought the squirt guns were going to be the big story of the week. The last time two ladies brought squirt guns to a protest, we never heard the end of it. That was June 2024, almost a year ago, and people on Facebook groups for expats are still worried about being attacked by squirt gun-wielding mobs if they visit Barcelona, even though it's only happened once, or now twice, in a city of millions. So the big question on a lot of people's minds is Barcelona against tourism? Here's my take. A few people who live in the more touristy areas are legitimately annoyed at what's happening to their neighborhoods. Most Spaniards would never go to a protest about it, and Barcelona has many, many neighborhoods where tourism is barely an issue. In fact, based on my personal experience, some of which I mentioned at the beginning of this article, I would say you're much more likely to be a victim of petty crime than to run into an anti-tourism protest when you're here in Barcelona. At most, you might see some graffiti that says, "Tourist go home," but to take that as an expression of majority opinion is quite a stretch. Personally, I interpret graffiti as expressing the opinion of a tiny group of agitators who have to ask their parents for money to buy spray paint. It's worth mentioning that all of the tourist go home graffiti I've seen recently seems to be done in the same handwriting. It may be the work of literally one person. Anyway, the types of people who go to anti-tourism protests are not exactly representative of the popular will. They are, and I am doing my best not to be insulting here, a very specific type of person with a very specific interpretation of reality. So I would not, if I were you, spend a single moment worrying about anti-tourism protests while planning a trip to Spain. Most people out here are just living their lives, and they're not at all worried about who you are and what you're doing wandering down the Rambla. As usual, that's just my 2 cents. Let me know what you think at expatmadrid.com/donate or elsewhere. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's about all I've got for today. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. In the immortal words of the Wu-Tang Clan, protect your neck and leave your nice jewelry at home. Otherwise, don't worry too much. Although, while we are on the topic of anti-tourism protests, have you ever noticed that some people are more than happy to create their identities out of long lists of things they dislike? I wrote about this years ago. I wrote an article called "Why It's Better to Be Pro Than Anti," and logically it pissed some people off, but that just sort of proved my point. If being angry about things that are completely out of your control is part of your identity, you're going to be angry a lot. My recommendation then and now is to be pro something and create positive things in your life, rather than being anti and waiting for everyone else to change. It is a lot more difficult to be pro, obviously. It takes 1 second to come up with an objection to any idea or plan or any action of anybody, really. Being pro or being in favor of something requires more thought and requires being selective and requires probably some actual work at some point. Anyway, I'm backed up by quite a bit of Buddhist philosophy and also Stoic philosophy. I've talked about Stoicism on here. Well, as it turns out, both Buddhism and Stoicism will tell you that a lot of the things that you think are big problems are actually just your brain creating thought loops about things that are out of your control. You might as well just let it go and move on with your life. If you are angry about a long list of things, you probably don't want to hear that, and I will not argue with you, but it is worth thinking about. For more on this topic, check out episode 29, which is called Turning 40 and Getting Stoic. Episode 29. That's an article and podcast that I like a lot. Other than that, you could check out Learn Spanish with Daniel over on YouTube. That is my YouTube channel where I teach Spanish. Learn Spanish with Daniel. Easy to find, and I've got somewhere over 50 videos on there for different topics that will help you to learn Spanish. Last week I made one about the verb doler, which is to hurt, basically. So I talked about different ways you can say that different parts of your body hurt. There's a parts of the body component to the video, also the grammatical bit, and of course much, much more. That is Learn Spanish with Daniel over on YouTube. You could follow me on Instagram. Just look for my name. I am Daniel Welsh, Welsch. You could buy my books on Amazon. If you are listening to this in English, I can pretty much guarantee that you do not need me to teach you English, but you might have some Spanish-speaking friends who could benefit from one or several of my books. Just look for my name again on Amazon, Daniel Welsh. I've got 18 books for people trying to learn English. So that's another option of how you can support the podcast. You could like or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. Leave a comment or a review on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. Everything helps. I appreciate you. Thank you very much for listening, and we will talk soon. Until next time, hasta la próxima. Bye.